Fantastic. I think we are all ready to go. So, Anab Jain, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was talking about this iron ore pit that takes about a lot of Austria's iron ore and goes into this steelworks where they convert the iron ore into steel, and this kind of phenomenal operations in West Alpine, making most of Austria's tracks. And the point I wanted to make here was that even though Erzberg is so big, it's not enough for our needs. So 80% of the iron ore comes from here. At the edge of the Amazon rainforest of Para in north-central Brazil sits the largest iron ore pit on the planet. Extracted from the depths of Mina da Carajás are metals found in everyday appliances and items around the globe. Scientists have learned that nearly 10% of the deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon has been between 2005 and 2015 due to mining activities. Previously, it was thought to be just about 1 or 2%, but they did not take into account all the ancillary services that were also needed, like roads and staff housing and airports, and major deforestation brought about by hydroelectric dams that often provide energy for mining operations. Wood from surrounding forest is cut for charcoal to fuel the pig iron plants, resulting in annual deforestation of 6,100 kilometers square. In our field trip, we heard a lecture from Helmut Androkowicz, professor of non-ferrous metallurgy, University of Leoben, Austria, about the bigger geopolitical and economic tensions around mining. He told us about the dysfunctional economics of certain forms of recycling, where dumping red mud is €5, while recycling is 500 euros per unit. We know the destructive impact of mining on ecosystems and communities, and this incredibly powerful piece in the National Geographic tells just that. A tragic story of how a 550-mile railway, which stretches from the Mina da Carajás deep in the mountainous regions to the port of Ponta de Madeira in St. Louis. The train carries ore in its metal boxes, destroying ecosystems and communities along the way. So we can have railway tracks in Europe and be proud that we prefer only rail travel because, yes, it is 100% more sustainable than air travel. I'm not disputing that, but I also want to foreground how complex these things are. This report in New York Times, actually, The New World Envisioning Life After Climate Change by David Wallace-Wells, just last week, talks about this, that a renewables revolution will require a mining revolution, and the need for lithium mining, including many others, for electric vehicle batteries will grow 8-fold by 2030. And then this World Bank report in 2020 emphasizes the same idea, that the production of minerals such as graphite, lithium, and cobalt could increase by nearly 500% by 2050 to meet the growing demand for clean energy technologies. It estimates that 3 million tons of minerals and metals will need to deploy solar, wind, and geothermal power, as well as energy storage that will be required for achieving a below 2 degrees rise in the future. It's everywhere. The lithium in our antidepressants, the stainless steel in the needles of our syringes that deliver vaccines, the aluminum in our heat pumps, the copper in our wind turbines, the titanium in the Mars exploration rovers, the gold in the James Webb Telescope. This complex picture calls into account our individual and collective ethics of action and inaction. It is evident that our actions to the challenges we face have an ecology of causes and effects that we need to be cognizant of. None of the actions we do come free, but inaction also doesn't come free. The problem is big, and solutions for such large geopolitical and infrastructural challenges will need to take into account wider economic, political, social, cultural implications. These things don't happen in isolation. To say stop extraction or only take trains means we are pushing the problem elsewhere. And understanding the externalities and unintended consequences becomes really crucial. This is not to say that we shouldn't champion the causes, but we need to understand that every action has a wider ecology of effects. It made me realize that there needs to be a step between the problem and the solution. Hell, there needs to be something that does not promise quick solutions, but opens possibilities, foregrounds the ecological nature of the problem space, and acknowledges the interconnected nature of such complex problems, meaning that the solutions will also be equally entangled and not siloed into narrow forms. A lot of my understanding of the space further deepens since we at Superflux have initiated an experiential research project called Cascade Inquiry with the support from King's College London, a generative space for collectively imagining and building of futures where positive climate action has been taken. In this project, we investigate the planetary climate crisis and the lack of ecologies of action at the scale that is needed. We ask, where is power located? Who can access it? How can we act on that power? And what change can we create? One of the people we revisited was Karen Barad, whose work really resonated deeply. They write, there are no singular causes and there are no individual agents of change. Responsibility is not ours alone, and yet our responsibility is greater than it would be if it were ours alone. Responsibly entails an ongoing responsiveness to the entanglements of self and the other, here and there, now and then. We need to meet the universe halfway, to take responsibility for the role that we play in the world's differential becoming. I believe that design, the 21st and dare I say 22nd century versions of design that many of you today have already talked about, reimagined and renewed, could operate in this halfway space. To become the connective tissue that conjoins our actions to a larger ecology of change. To understand and take into account externalities and unintended consequences. To generate multiple tipping points of positive transformation. To empower the non-institutionalized fugitive spaces or the undercommons. To attune us with the wider ecology of planetary life. And I want to call such a practice ancillary design. Ancillary design meets the universe halfway. It is the connective issue that conjoins our ecology, our actions to a larger ecology of change, understands externalities, generates multiple tipping points of positive transformation, empowers the undercommons, and attunes us to wider ecology of our planet. A quick Google search showed that actually ancillary design is a thing. It's a term used to describe a variety of informal office furniture and accessories that support multiple postures like sitting, perching, lounging, and standing. Ancillary furniture is more for in-between spaces, such as lounges, enclaves, lobbies, patios, cafes, and so on. And I love the idea of expanding this beyond furniture to how design can truly support multiple postures and truly exist in these in-between spaces. So as something that is connective and liminal and operates in this halfway space, whilst not easy, I felt it necessary to draw out what I meant in this ABC list. For any of you who know some of my previous work and fondness for A to B lists, you'll be happy to see that I've added a third column. So challenges replace problems, and there are some big ones: polarization, short-term thinking, eco-paralysis, inequality, and the in-between connective tissue, the ancillary design that picks these challenges up through deeply collaborative and rich practices and tools and co-production methods, such as deep listening, embodied experiences, myth-making, movement building, to lead to an ecology of incredibly positive effects, empowering communities to active hopes, to reimagining plural worlds. You may argue that in and of itself, these are not really design. I agree. But together, I think these methods, approaches, and tools can aid us in the times ahead to reimagine design's changing role. As Ursula Le Guin writes, the end justifies the means. But what if there is never an end? All we have is means. And so I'm going to share some examples of what I see as ancillary design. Again, to emphasize that none of these are new or even recent works, and they're not the only possibilities. Here, we are not inventing a new, we're looking at what already is as if it were new, connecting with rather than producing. For one of the biggest challenges of our time's polarization, it is really difficult to know where to start. But recently, I've started learning the practice of deep listening. The theory was first created by Carl Rogers, who said, "We think we listen, but very rarely do we listen with real understanding and true empathy." Yet listening of this very special kind is one of the most potent forces for change that I know. So I've been speaking to Emily Cashriel, a BBC journalist and a deep listening pioneer, who said, "You're not listening for things that you have to defend. You're actually listening for things that you can learn." Emily used deep listening to ask, can dairy adapt to climate change? And here I'm sharing her work, which can also be found on the BBC website. So according to April 2021 UN Global Methane Assessment, manure, bulbs, and farts represent 32% of the world's total methane emissions. So this is almost coming to par with aviation and fashion industries. So amid polarized debate, Emily asks how dairy farmers see the role of their industry in climate change and finds a mixture of doubt, denial, and commitment to change. She spoke to Hannah Edwards and her family, who are dairy farmers, and came to understand Hannah's love for the cows and desire to do everything she can for animal welfare, but through the prism. And it's that prism through which she sees the world, including climate change. Nothing beats the feeling when you see a cow take its first breath, she said, after battling to get it to breathe. I milk each cow twice a day, every single day of the year, so they know I want the best for them. She spoke to several others, including Hannah's boss, farmer Philip Davies. Farmers are the most optimistic people I know, he said. But scratch under the surface, we're carrying disappointment and anger. We've been silenced by everyone pointing the finger at us. You naughty people, you are ruining the planet. He conveys the depth of traumatic experiences he has endured and the multiple occasions on which he feels dairy farming, his own calling, has been unjustly targeted. In his eyes, climate change is yet another example of the faceless men in dark corridors, looking for a scapegoat and seizing on the usual suspect, farmers. Emily's research pulled in work of Lorraine Whitmarsh, who writes, "We are motivated to only agree with the parts of climate change narrative that align with our livelihoods or core beliefs, denying our responsibility if the implications of accepting them would be challenging for us. This is a psychological behavior termed as motivated reasoning." And Carla Jeffries writes, "Framing climate change action as showing consideration for others or improving economic or technological development can have more impact with climate deniers than focusing on avoiding climate risk." What began to be clear for Emily was that whilst media representations of climate change narratives had become extremely polarized, with each side of the discussion represented by partisan outlets as a caricature, behind these stereotypes are the nuanced stories of people's life experiences which contribute to their worldview. By having these conversations, perhaps there's common ground, she thought, that could lead to sustainable change. Then she began to talk to them further and learned that beyond this immediate feeling, the farmers were actually feeling an extra sense of responsibility. Philip's son Ben, for instance, was spearheading a whole program of work to make the farms more efficient and reduce their climate and environmental impact, all the way from huge financial investments to stored manure to reduce carbon footprint for fertilizing fields and injecting manure in ways that reduces emissions. There's a lot of work that was going on. Another example or a challenge that I think could be addressed through this lens of ancillary design is the idea of short-term thinking. And I'd like to share an example from my own practice. Again, it's not a new example, but I think may be relevant. But, you know, we all understand the shortcomings of short-term thinking. As Kofi Annan said, we have to choose between a global market driven only by calculations of short-term profit and one which has a human face. Especially in times of crisis as we are in right now, there is always an initial reaction to get into a rapidly reactive and defensive mode of operation, which can often blind us to radical changes as well as new threats and opportunities. On the other hand, our work at Superflux explores how we can think long-term, but thinking is not enough. We focus on the potential for experiential, visceral, and embodied future imaginations that surpass some of our evolutionary asymmetries, especially around temporal myopia. One of our theories of change is that if people can experience different, more positive worlds, if they can touch, smell, and feel those worlds, then it will situate themselves in their memories and become desirable. It's also because George Layoff writes about this very clearly and following a lot of scientific research that actually only 2% of the human mind uses data to make decisions. 98% of our decision making is unconscious, led by stories, emotions, and experiences. So we started looking at data from NASA, for instance, this very familiar graph, which tells the story of our earth-shattering progress in warming up the planet. It's very helpful for information, but not for imagination. Beyond the single vector rise or vector of temperature rise, there's so much more that this graph doesn't tell us. For instance, that we will need to have food moving from 32 kilograms per capita to 52 kilograms in the future in the face of extreme weather and more so related issues and challenges with supply chains and what have you. And we're already feeling that now. Many people find it difficult to read these graphics and make sense of, see themselves in these graphs. And so we decided to go where data can't take us and help us attune ourselves with feeling and imagining in the long run. So we started to imagine a future in the Western world here in London where we've moved from a, this kind of sense of abundance to shortages and insecurities. We imagine living in a future city with repeated flooding, periods with almost no food in supermarkets, economic instabilities, and so on. And we started asking some simple questions. What food can we eat? How can we prosper in this world? We always like to think through making and prototyping because we believe that our world will have materiality in it and atoms in it. And so this is John, my partner, who's built food computers from scratch using the idea of fogponics. So using only nutrient fog, no water or soil, to grow things indoors really quickly. And we built an entire future London apartment that had been drastically adapted for living with the consequences of climate change. Including these kind of handcrafted DIY computers. So you walk in and you have this sense of a very familiar home, but then actually, as you start to look around, there are hints and evidences of an altered world with newspapers and even books that provoked people with titles like Pets as Proteins and How to Cook in Scarcity. Visitors could see that there were fully working contraptions of food computers oozing purple fog, bubbling spirulina, blooming mycelium, recipes for fox creole. And when we invited people to spend time in this space, inside this climate-altered apartment, strange things begin to happen. The future becomes the present, and the future becomes old at the same time. You look out the window and you see a slightly different, altered London. Over 100,000 visitors came through this apartment at the Center for Contemporary Culture in Barcelona, where it was living. The important thing here is that this is not a prediction, but it's not a render either. The intention of such a speculative approach with hands-on experimentation is that it offered people a chance to really directly step into the future, to confront their fears, but also show concrete ways in which they could mitigate the shock of climate change. In this instance, the work of ancillary design was that it provided the space. These embodied experiences provide the space between data and policy decisions, allowing us to use 90% of our faculties of minds and bodies to make more nuanced decisions about our collective futures. The work continued to evolve in many different forms. We were very inspired by permaculture and used many of those farming techniques, and really to start to build a sense of attunement with our full sensory and cognitive capabilities. In a way, this is the work of conceptual grounding, like, creating these kind of scaffolding that help us stretch our sense of time and therefore possibility. It also helps build a sense of felt responsibility. And finally, I want to show an example around inequality, which really, again, is an incredibly huge challenge. But really, this is about movement building on a large scale. And the ancillary work here is to generate for designers this ecology of actions that have positive cascading effects. So this is, again, not a new example, something most of you might have heard of and seen already, but I really am very fond of it. So this is a map of the autonomous administration of North and East Syria. And theirs is a story of a movement which actually started off as a movement for political autonomy, but became so much more. Following countless conflicts, the supporters of the region's administration created an autonomy promoting decentralization, gender equality, environmental sustainability, social ecology, pluralistic tolerance for religious, cultural, and political diversity. Huge ambitions, but it started to work. And one key ancillary from this incredible project for me was the Mesopotamian ecology movement, or the MEM, that has been at the heart of the region's democratic revolution. Its principles and platforms have led to a growing informal movement for ecological resilience in the entire neighborhood. MEM grew out of single cause issues like dam construction, deforestation, but then they've gone on to build these fully fledged ecological groups and call them ecology councils. Its mission, as one of its most prominent founding members, Erkan Ayboga, says, mission is to strengthen the ecological character of the Kurdish freedom movement and the Kurdish women's movement, which is brilliant. And this is perhaps my only slide with lots of text, because I absolutely love the multi-layered nature of their priorities, from reducing dependence on imports to advocating for ecological policy making, education, exploitative investment should be reduced, and building ecological resistance. Okay, so given the diversity of examples that I've shown, there's of course a question of who practices ancillary design. I think it's a collaborative and a cooperative practice. It empowers those who've already been using it in many different forms, but haven't been able to have a label for it yet. But it importantly also liberates designers from having to always ship things or to have solutions to narrowly defined problems. This is a beautiful photograph by Prasenjit Yadav of Northeast India's iconic root bridges. So it's the Ficus elastica tree is planted on either sides of a river or a valley or a ravine. And as their roots grow above ground, the local people start creating knots around them and moving them towards each other. And at some point, the roots meet and start entwining, and over a period of I think 10 to 15 years, these roots start becoming bridges. And it's just incredible, because it's in a place where concrete bridges have failed, to survive even a few earthquakes and floods and landslides. But these bridges have only grown stronger, more resilient, and robust with age. What's more, these trees themselves are ecosystems. For instance, the single elastica tree has, I think, a few hundred species living inside and within it. So for me, Ficus elastica is one of the most beautiful examples of ancillary design. Just want to conclude by saying that I think ancillary design can help design for the planet because it nurtures a practice that supports an ecology of actions for positive long-term change. It gives voice to urgent, productive practices that are often not acknowledged. It provides scaffolding to collectively imagine many possible worlds. It assists all other design practices in designing for the planet. So I think of it as a companion practice that supports all our other design disciplines that we are already currently practicing. And I feel that what I've been trying to say all along is been summed up really well in this Life of Lines by Tim Ingold, who says, in this oceanic world, every being has to find a place for itself by sending out tendrils which can bind it to others. Observe octopuses and anemones in the sea. They do not aggregate and they do not fuse. They do, however, interpenetrate. Their many tendrils and tentacles interweave to form a boundless and ever-extending meshwork. That's it. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Great. Nice. Thank you very much for that, Anab. Okay, so everybody, what's on tomorrow? Well, join us here again at 10 a.m. to hear from Newcastle City Council's Pam Smith, Nicola Matthews at Tony's Chocolonely, 2 panel discussions on transport and food, and some exciting how-to sessions for designers who want to take action. I, for one, am looking forward to it, so make sure you get yourself some good rest this evening, and we will see you there. Take care.